I do believe, and I think Zuckerberg is right, that smart glasses is the next platform after smartphones. The thing about it that I just shrug about is that my reading of history is that there's no way that Facebook is going to be the dominant player. And that's simply because my reading of history is that the dominant players always come from outside the current industry. They're not the big ones. They're the small startups, the unknowns.
What's up, everyone, and welcome to another Mind and Heart opening episode on Just Tap In. My name is Emilio, and I'm your host, and today we will take a deep dive into the mind of one of the most legendary futurists in the world. Kevin Kelly is the founding executive editor of Wired magazine and a diverse polymath. He co-founded the All Species Foundation, a nonprofit aimed at cataloging and identifying every living species on Earth. He also established the Long Now Foundation, which aims to encourage long-term thinking. In his spare time, he writes New York Times best-selling books such as What Technology Wants and The Inevitable. Silicon Valley has called his books must-reads, and Hollywood movies have relied heavily on his predictions for the creation of believable futures. His work will leave a lasting impact on the future, and even as a college dropout who traded a formal education for spending a decade in his 20s to roaming and photographing the disappearing traditions of Asia, he now has built this incredibly diverse career. Get ready, because we will be diving today into everything from blockchain and decentralization, the Metaverse, Kevin's 1000 True Fans theory, how to define success, and imagining what a day would look like in 2050. And last but not least, if you want to join this mission and learn alongside the world's leading game changers, I invite you to subscribe to this channel and like this video to help it get shown to more people like you. And now, without further ado, we welcome the man who was nominated by Tim Ferriss as the real, most interesting man in the world, Kevin Kelly. Kevin Kelly, welcome to the podcast. How are you, brother?
Thank you for inviting me. It's my pleasure to be here. And thank you for the honor of asking me questions.
Nah, it's so amazing to have you on here. One of the world's best futuristic minds that we've seen in a while. And really, I wanted to start with you, really when you were around my age. I'm 23 right now, and you went to college for 1 year. And after that, something happened along the way. And I wanted to let you uncover that story and maybe how your definition of success has been completely different to many of the people that are going through the system right now, going through just the motions and really taking what society has told us, but you went a different way. I wanted to first begin with that.
Yeah, I think it's really important to constantly review your own definition of success, how you would succeed, that what we sometimes call the victory state, to imagine yourself in this someday in the future when you're doing exactly what it is that you want to do. What does that day look like? And I did that as a kid, your age. I would think about that. And my answer was that it did not involve working for a corporation, with a time clock, and that in exchange for giving up some of the, say, monetary rewards, I would gain a little bit more time and freedom to do stuff. So I couldn't decide whether to be an artist or a scientist, whether to go to MIT or RISD. And so I had from the very beginning a kind of a sense that I wanted to spend my time in a kind of artistic way, or in a kind of maybe independent way as well. And so that's sort of the path I set off dropping out of school. I was sort of figured I'm signing up for a life where I don't have much money, but I have a lot of time and freedom. And at that time, I would imagine, well, I probably will wind up living in some really easy and cheap place to live in a house that I would build myself, and I wouldn't have much, but I would be making little things or writing or whatever it was. I wasn't even imagining writing at the time. I don't know what it was, how I was spending my day, but it would be in kind of an impoverished state that would allow me to make stuff. And I was really interested in making and doing things. And so there was a cost. The cost was I wasn't going to have a nice car. I wasn't going to have a nice house, and that at the time seemed like fine, because my idea of success was just being able to have the time to pursue things. And life is trade-offs. It's just all trade-offs. 100%. Business is all trade-offs. Art is all trade-offs. Science is all trade-offs. And so you kind of have to trade off. It's like, what are you going to trade off? And you don't have to be committed. I mean, you don't have to. You can change your mind. Is what I'm saying. It's like you can start off with somebody and decide, oh, later on, actually, I kind of like to stay in nice places, or a clean hotel is important to me versus sleeping on the ground. And so, but if you do, then you have to give somewhere else. You have to sacrifice in some other way, or you have to trade off something. And so I was willing to make my definition of success was having control of my time. That was the central thing of me doing the things that I wanted to do, that I wanted to be able to, get up in the morning and be eager and just dying to get started in doing that. And so that to me was success. If I could live a life where I got up in the morning and I couldn't wait to start doing what I was doing, that's a raging success.
Yeah, that's fascinating. I mean, most of the people do exactly the opposite. We trade our time for money, especially right after we get out of an institution or university.
Right.
We try to rush into getting into that, like, how can I be the most efficient I can as possible, make as much money as I can. And one of the things that's fascinating about that I was reading in your book, The Inevitable, was that you were talking about, this notion of the machines are going to be the ones that are efficient. It's the human's job to be inefficient. That's where all great ideas come from.
Yeah.
I wanted to hear your take on that.
Yeah. So, I mean, just going back to the earlier thing, a lot of people believe that they need a lot of money to be able to have total control of their time. And that's, I mean, there's this kind of a famous, I think maybe it was Ralph Potts or someone else.
Yeah, he's been on the podcast.
Yes, right. So he talked about this, I think he was the first to notice there was, maybe it was a movie or somewhere where a Wall Street guy says, I want to earn $1 billion so I can buy a motorcycle to ride across China. I have to work really, really hard to do it. It's like you need $1,000 to do that, and you could earn it at the minimum wage. And so this idea that you need a lot of money to be able to have control of your time is completely wrong. You can gain control of your time right now if you were going to want to surrender money for it. But the idea that as the world progresses and more of kind of our basic needs become cheaper, and that's true. I mean, it's like if you wanted to live on beans and rice and a few vegetables, you could definitely do that for very little money. You don't need that much money to actually get enough food and calories and nutrition if you weren't concerned about, fancy foods and fast foods and stuff. And so, so that means that the kind of productive efficiency part of our lives are more and more taken over by machines and civilization and modern technology, and will be more so in the future. And I think that's good news for us, because all the things that humans like to do, like what we're doing right now, is inefficient. I mean, this is an inefficient thing. I don't know what we're accomplishing, but I can tell you it's not the most efficient way to do it, but it's very enjoyable. and it's fun, and we're small talk, and we're exchanging ideas in an inefficient way, but it's enjoyable. And people who make art, that's not efficient. You're not measuring how many pieces of art you make an hour. Science is inherently inefficient because you're doing things that don't work. You're trying stuff that's new and will not work. And entrepreneurs are hugely inefficient because most of the things they make will fail. And so, so it turns out that the things that we're good at, and maybe even best at compared to machines, and certain things that we enjoy, are all inherently inefficient. And so I think we want to embrace more of that. And I'm a big believer in sabbaticals, the Sabbath, taking time off, goofing around, wasting time. Just because that's necessary for creativity and innovation. It's no coincidence that the young will often invent new things because they'll spend 100 hours wasting time in something that doesn't have a name. And I think that ability to devote unproductive time, or time that's not being accounted for in a productive manner, is very, very, very important.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, just doing art, like spending your time doing something that's creative, I think you tap into a source inside the human soul that is not easily accessible while you're in a cubicle working on a laptop, things
Right.
like that. So right now I've seen like a little bit of a trend in your social media where you've been making daily art. I wanted to know why you're doing that, and if it's connected in any way with NFTs.
It's not connected to NFTs. I've sold a couple just to try it, but I don't get any pleasure from selling NFTs. So I haven't really pursued that. I do a piece of art which I then share, and part of the process is I share whatever it is, whether it's good or bad. That's the habit of creativity, is that you have to understand that most of the stuff you make is not going to be very good, and not let that stop you. Just you work through it. The making of the bad part is a necessary step in making of the great stuff. Why do I do it? I don't have no idea why I do it. I don't know what it means. I just decided that I enjoyed doing it. So I do it at night in bed before I fall asleep, and I have no idea what it is I'm going to draw. It's like a blank thing, and I'm channeling it, and I'm partly, I do it to be surprised by what I do. It's kind of like writing. The reason why I write is to understand what it is that I think, because I don't know what I think until I try to write. And the same thing with the drawings is like, I don't know what I want to draw until after I've drawn it. And so I'm surprised as anybody else. And it's that little bit of pleasure of seeing something new that I had no idea where it comes from. That's the fun part.
Yeah, I've heard you talk about the subconscious mind a lot. And just going off what you just said, like there's this quote that's in your book that you say, no matter what its price, a work has no value unless it is seen. Unfound masterpieces are worthless.
Yeah. So yeah, it's I really believe in the power of sharing things. Of course, we have kind of oversharing, but still working. The value of sharing is in part to have others enjoy it, but it's in part to inform ourselves. I have this theory that what language does is language actually allows us to access our own thoughts. If we didn't have language, we wouldn't even know what we thought. It's like putting things into language and having that structure that actually gives us access to our own thinking. So even as I am speaking, it's in part not just for your benefit, but for my benefit as well. And that's the whole thing about sharing with art is, in part, yes, it's to kind of share the joy to others, but in part, it's also that sharing is partly to inform ourselves by people's reactions, by just the movement of sending it out. All those things, to me, are important part of that creative process.
Yeah. You have a fascinating prediction in your book, The Inevitable. And, maybe before we get into that, do you mind explaining what you mean by the inevitable trends that we'll see?
Yeah. So, most of the things that happen in evolution at the particular species level are inherently unpredictable. And most of what will happen in the future is going to be unpredictable, particularly if we talk with any specificity about a product or a company or a country. And that's because in these kind of very high dimensional spaces, the rules of chaos and complex systems take effect, and you have sensitivity to inertial conditions and all these other things, which basically means that there's chaotic things like a three-body problem. It's just inherently unpredictable, stochastic. But there are underlying trends that can shape the general directions. So the little illustration I would use is, you imagine a valley and it's raining, and the raindrops are coming down into the valley, and then they begin to kind of flow down the valley. And that path of a raindrop is unpredictable. It's stochastic. It cannot be in any way predicted, but the direction is inevitable, which is down. So we know that the general direction is going to flow down, even though the actual path is unpredictable. And so I am looking for those kinds of general paths that happen without being able to predict the specifics. And so the general trends can happen because of, even within evolutionary systems, because of physics and chemistry. There's only so many ways you can arrange molecules because of chemistry and physics. And so I would imagine almost any planet that has a gravity similar to ours and life, like we're going to find quadrupeds, because that is a physical solution that's 4 wheels, 4 legs. It's going to be arrived at many times. It's kind of inevitable. It's inevitable that you're going to find quadrupeds. Now, it's not inevitable that you're going to find zebras or marsupials or whatever. So I'm looking for, in technology, those kinds of inherent, basic, fundamental things that are driven in a very base level, that are kind of independent of human choices and the heroic people that we think invent things, which is also a falsity because there's simultaneous invention across the board. If Albert Einstein had not invented a relativity, within a few years, there were other people who were in line to do it. So what is our inevitable kind of trends in technology? And in the book I wrote called What Technology Wants, kind of went through those, and they're kind of fundamental, like we start off with general purpose things, and we actually over time always make them more and more specific and specialized. So we have a camera, and then we start to make high-speed cameras and underwater cameras and infrared cameras, and then we make infrared underwater high-speed cameras, and then we generally go from general to specific and specialized. That's just a general trend. So it's inevitable that whatever thing we have today, that in the future we'll have a specialized version of it. So that's one kind of inevitable things. And I think there are also, once something arrives, we begin to see the outlines of where it's going to go. So I would say that, In the course of evolution, in the course of evolution has invented minds over and over again. There's at least 30 different periods where it kind of made minds.
Hmm.
And so making sentient beings that can learn and adapt, or organs that can learn and adapt and anticipate, that's, again, seems to be something that evolution wants. And so I would say the technology of AI is inevitable. It's something in the general way that self-organizing systems work, is that they wanted to make an organ that can anticipate and adapt and learn. So AIs are inevitable. Now, having said that, again, I said the specifics aren't. So we have a lot of choice about those specifics, about who owns it, about who runs it, what's governing it, is it commercial or nonprofit. There's so many things about the character of these technologies that we have a choice in that matter a lot to us. So we have plenty of choice still, even though AIs are inevitable in some way. We have a lot of room and a lot of choice about deciding what kind of AIs we want to have. And that's where our choice lies, is in choosing the characters and the specific species of these general trends and genres.
Yeah. And there's a lot of people that might, look back at human history and, see things as like war, slavery, racism, and they might be asking like, why are those things, or why were they inevitable in order to happen? And, I just wanted to hear your views on that. Like maybe like the darker aspects of our species. Why do you think these things occurred throughout evolution of our species and our consciousness? And where are we headed now?
Well, as soon as you introduce free will, people are going to choose things. And it's my observation that almost every evil committed in the world is committed with the idea of eliminating some other evil.
Hmm. Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, it's like people are convinced that the people doing evil are usually convinced that they're eradicating evil somewhere else. And so the impulse to eradicate evil is noble, comes from our good side. And the evil that someone perceives is so horrible that they're going to commit evil to do it. And so we have free will. I think those kinds of things are going to happen. People are going to choose these, and that's part of what civilization is trying to do, is to minimize these kinds of things. In fact, that's what we have evidence for, is that fewer and fewer people die because of wars and murders. And so I don't see it going away. I see it as a way of minimizing these, of having social collaboration. At times, the crazies will rail that we're losing freedoms, but animals have total freedom, and look where it's gotten them. What I think the human virtue that we want, that I cherish the most, is collaboration. And it's through collaboration that we've made civilization. So the highest human virtue for me is collaboration and not freedom. Animals are totally free. So I think I think what we have is we can minimize the inevitable disasters and bad choices that people make through education, through social controls, through norms. We become better people.
Yeah. And it seems like right now, one inevitable trend is that collaboration, cooperation. Another one that's coming up right now for a lot of us and many people are talking about is the fact that a lot of systems are going decentralized.
Mhm.
And I wanted to hear from you, like right now, this decentralization of our institutions, systems, banks with blockchain, how are those going to allow us to flourish as a species?
Well, you're talking mostly about crypto stuff. So the dream of crypto is very, again, very noble. The
Mm,
problem, the challenge that crypto has is that it remains to be seen whether crypto's even how useful it's going to be
mm,
in actually delivering something that works in that way. And first is when you begin to dig into it, decentralization is not a binary state. Like a lot of the things that we're most concerned about, like from privacy to consciousness, none of these are binary states. All of these are continuums and with multiple dimensions.
mm,
So, including decentralization, there's different ways, and you can call decentralization. And lots of systems have some parts that are very centralized and some parts that are decentralized. And some crypto stuff are heavily centralized in some parts.
mm,
And there is, again, a trade-off. The trade-off with centralization versus decentralization is that decentralization is inherently unscalable and inefficient. So,
mm,
I mean, it doesn't take long to think about, Bitcoin. The idea that every single transaction is going to be recorded by every single node and all that forever stuff dragged forever, that is like an insanely stupid way to run a civilization.
mm,
So yes, there's lots and tons of tricks to compress that legacy, but it doesn't get over the fact that decentralized systems have lots and lots of drawbacks, and particularly with money. Um, every DAO so far, every distributed autonomous organization so far, is going off chain to try and deal with governance issues, because another trade-off in the blockchain world is this immutability, the incorruptibility of it. Well, that's, again, can be a virtue, but it's a disadvantage in other ways. Imagine having a constitution that didn't have a self-amendment clause.
mm.
You're setting up for long-term disaster because you can't change anything.
Yeah.
So the idea that you're setting up some kind of a thing that can't be changed or can't be corrupted or changed means that you're locking in things that in a world that's changing very fast, and all kinds of fundamental things can collapse. The dollar could collapse tomorrow, but you've made everything in dollars. What do you do? So the idea of trying to have more decentralized organizations, I think I would reword it this way. I think where we're headed to is we are going to invent many, many new varieties of how to collaborate. We want
Mm,
other choices to how to collaborate other than, say, a company, which is one type of collaborating a lot of people. There are nonprofits, and they have maybe a different way, but they may be topologically very similar. And we have governments, which is another way. But we're now ready to have some tools that will enable us to invent whole other ways of collaboration. Some of them will have aspects of it that will be more decentralized than others in other parts. but some may be even more centralized. But the important thing is that we have some tools like blockchain that can allow us to think about ways of organizing work and collaboration, where maybe you have people who don't know each other and they're contributing something, and their contribution should kind of flow through and they should get rewarded based on their contribution over time. That's a very powerful idea, whether it involves decentralization or not. Some might, some may not. It's not, to me, the most central issue. And again, it depends. There are lots of different varieties of decentralization. And there are going to be lots of experiment tried, which I'm a big fan of. Most of them will fail. That's how it goes. But I don't think this idea that decentralization itself, in some kind of crude, plain way, is necessarily a final solution, because it's inherently inefficient. It's that's the downside of decentralized work, is that you got people, it's like the anthill. You get ants running around all over the place. Some of them are running backwards. Now, overall, that's a very adaptable way, but it's not a very efficient way. And there are times when you want to be a lot more efficient. And so I think there's a little bit of a misplaced emphasis on decentralization. First of all, when it's not really defined very well, and secondly, when it doesn't incorporate all the disadvantages of decentralization.
Yeah. Would you classify it as an inevitable trend, though? Still, would you classify decentralization as inevitable?
Yeah, it's a really fair question. I think the trend for me is not towards decentralization. The trend is towards more varieties of organizations, which would include decentralized ones, but like not necessarily only decentralized ones.
Yeah, you speak about that in the book. It's more of like these hybrid models that are, most successful. And one of the things that fascinates me a lot in the book is that at the end of each chapter, you kind of go through, and it really speaks about how your mind is years ahead into the future. You give like a little example of what my life would be like in 2050, and then, you talk about different technologies and whatever you're addressing in the chapter. I'm really interested to know, like, what would a short day look like for you in 2050, or for us right now, if we were having this conversation, even in 2050, how would this day that you're having today change a little bit?
So one of the things that a lot of people thinking about the future forget is that most of your day and most of the things that surrounding us will be the same. The bulk of if you turn around and look in your room, the bulk of those technologies are all very old. You're surrounded mostly by old things: stucco, sheetrock, glass, wooden table. That's the bulk of the stuff. And in I guess that's 30 years, 2050, we'll still have internet of some sort. We'll still have texting. Some things will go away, but most, and some of the things that are dominant now won't be dominant. So the dominant things will shift. The things that kind of most occupy our attention. And that's another thing about technology, is that as technology succeeds, it becomes invisible. We don't pay any attention to it. I'm expecting that for blockchain and crypto. If they work, no one will think about them in 2050. Just like we don't think about the plumbing, which people were very excited for that one time, running water. we don't think about them anymore, but they're hugely important. Having running water in your house, the
It's like a
hygiene,
gradual adaptation that you kind of just get used to with time, right?
motors, having motors, that was a huge thing. People were very excited about having motors in their home, and now there's dozens of motors in this room I don't even know are here. So they become invisible.
Yeah.
And so will some of the technologies today. They will succeed and they will become invisible. So the first thing I would say, if I was to describe 2050 a day, is to say a lot of it's going to be very, very familiar to us today, right now.
Yeah.
I imagine your bed will be the same, very little difference. Your bathroom could have some stuff in it that, the quantified self idea where you're being measured or sized up in a kind of a painless, effortless way, and stuff being tracked. Maybe there's a little bit more tracking of our wastes in terms of the amount of information and stuff from our body. That's one way you can track your body, is through the waste system. So, but you may not be paying much attention to that. I think cities are by and large will look different, except for maybe the way the parking will shift because of auto-driven cars. But the same streets will be there. I think we'll have a little bit more emphasis on pedestrians and bicycles and other alternative modes in certain parts of the city, reclaiming those, just because it's good for business. And the typical day, I think what will change are how people think of themselves and maybe how they're spending their time. And I imagine that we'll have smart glasses by then, and smart glasses bring in the mirror world where you have this melding of the two together. And so I think a lot of what we will be working on will be, still changing the environment, making maybe some, better designed buildings, but you would be using smart glasses to do that. Maybe you're on site more often, and say you're a designer and you're designing packages, you would use these new technologies to help that, in addition to the traditional ways. And so the traditional things don't go away. They may not be as dominant, but they're still going to be part of our process of doing a prototype first, or mocking it up, or doing a walkthrough. So I would say, imagine your life now, and there would be maybe even more collaboration than before. And maybe collaborating in some ways with people who collaborate, not just with people who you work with formally, but other types of collaboration.
Yeah.
So we're switching and zooming around, and I think some aspect of that, wearing smart glasses, will continue, and that will be a big part of our day. Even when we're walking down the street, or even when we're in another place, a physical place, we may still be collaborating in some way. So I think it won't feel too foreign to you. I think it will. Yeah. I think it will feel like a natural progression, in the same way that we've arrived here in your own life from maybe when you were a kid. It's not that far away.
I know you've said in the past that you're more of a visual learner. When you sit down to think about the future, do you see like all these, different worlds and potentials of what the future could look like? Or what's your process mentally when you're thinking about making these predictions or writing your books, blogs, everything?
That's a great question. And actually, I just blurbed a book that I'm going to recommend. It's not out yet, but it's called Imaginable by Jane McGonigal, who was a game designer and works for Institute for the Future. And it's the best book I know so far on how to do this. And awesome. There are methods and exercises. And the one thing that's really, really, really helpful is to do what you've just given me the assignment of, is to imagine a day in as many details as you possibly can, and in the particulars as you possibly can, to force yourself to kind of commit to things. And they're inevitably going to be wrong, but they're productively wrong. Because if you do, what the futurists do is scenarios. They do scenarios, and where it's not just one version, you have to make 5 versions. So we're going to do it again the same day, but with a different set of conditions, and you just do that over and over again. You do many of them, and that doing many of them is liberating in a certain sense, because what it's forcing you to do is to not go to the easy, cheap ones. And as the more you're trying to do different scenarios, the more you're kind of forced to the implausible. And right at that edge of the implausible is kind of where the future is going to be arriving, because it's not going to be, there are parts of it that are going to be unexpected.
Yeah, essentially it's like storytelling as well. And
yes,
you've talked about this theory, the adjacent possibles. So once you kind of uncover a door that you previously thought was impossible, you imagine a future of where that could be possible. It just opens a whole different parallel universe, essentially.
Right. And again, it's a skill that can be practiced and learned. And they have exercises. One exercise that Brian Eno and I would do was just, we called unthinkable futures. And we would just sort of take things that seemed unthinkable and say, well, wait, what if it actually happened? What would that world look like? And while that first premise might be totally impossible or unlikely, the consequences might be very plausible. And it was like, where we arrived, how we got there may be unlikely, but where we arrived might be very, very likely. And we wouldn't have gotten there unless we started somewhere crazy. So like, I'm just thinking of a trivial one. Like I was imagining, if you know anything about carcinogens, one of the most carcinogenic things out there is basically burnt meat. That black stuff in burnt meat is highly carcinogenic.
No.
And so
good to know.
Could you imagine barbecue being outlawed? So what if like barbecue was outlawed because it was carcinogenic, and you'd have these underground, barbecue places, people needing to singe freshly killed animals, which were also illegal, right? So those are the kinds of exercises that can lead to interesting ideas. And the idea is kind of the initial unthinkable suspension of disbelief in something, and then trying to follow it through to see where it goes in a kind of a storytelling science fiction way. But you're trying to build the world around it, and then sometimes you're arriving somewhere that then you can discard the kind of crazy beginning.
What implausible or maybe impossible future have you been trying to wrap your head around lately?
Well, I have been trying to figure out crypto and what I think about it, because there is many things that are very, very interesting about it. It's distorted by just huge amounts of money flowing through it, which make it very hard to see what's actually going around. So that's one thing. Spending time with another. Another very difficult thing to imagine is imagine a world of basically total surveillance, which I think is inevitable. So, I mean, it's to imagine a world a civilized world, a world that we want in that world, and how that plays out. So, I don't have a very good description of a day in the life of that. I'm paying attention to the Chinese because I think the Chinese are taking a different route. And while the West, everybody in the West wants to immediately, what's the word I want? Degrade them to basically shun that. I think they may be doing something interesting that we might want to be looking at. And so, so that's a real challenge, is to imagine a world where we continue to collect huge amounts of data. And of course, the whole smart glass mirror world and AR world is a world of total big data about our behavior. And so, so figuring out how that is going to be civilized is a real challenge.
Yeah. What was your reaction when Facebook announced that they were changing to Meta or the Metaverse?
Well, in one sense, I understand it because I do believe, and I think Zuckerberg is right, that smart glasses is the next platform after smartphones.
Hmm.
The thing about it that I just shrug about is that my reading of history is that there's no way that Facebook is going to be the dominant player in it. And that's simply because my reading of history is that the dominant players always come from outside the current industry. They're not the big ones. They're the small startups, the unknowns. And by the way, Facebook was not the first social media. Google was not the first search engine. Amazon was not the first bookstore. It's unlikely that the dominant player is going to be the first in either case.
Mm.
So for all those reasons, I think he's right about the metaverse, or the expanded version I call the mirror world, but I think he's wrong to think that Facebook will be dominant player.
Hmm. I'm going to quote you real quick again because I love this quote. It says, "The digital native is free to," actually, no, "the digital age is the age of the non-bestsellers, the underappreciated, the forgotten. As opposed to those self-made bestsellers, it's a world of niche fulfillment."
Yeah.
And, that's kind of wrapping together the whole 10,000, the 1,000 True Fans blog that you posted that I highly recommend people, especially if you're a creator, go and read that. If you could quickly summarize it in under 30 seconds, how would you describe?
Well, the idea is
1,000
that
True
with the new
Fans?
technology that we have, a creator, photographer, sculptor, movie maker, musician, has the option, the possibility of interacting directly with fans. And if you can interact directly with your fans and get paid for them directly, you don't need 1 million fans to make a living. If you have direct access to your fans and you cultivate them, and you could do something to where they would spend $100 on you, your true fans, the fans are crazy about everything you do and they want all of it. If you get 1,000 of them, then you have $100,000, which is for many people a living. And if you have more, if you're a duet, you need twice as many. So those numbers are kind of just arithmetic. So the idea is, and of course, then you can have other fans besides true fans. You can have fans only buy some of your stuff. So you can have concentric circles, but at the core, you should be able to make a living. And that was a theory that I had many, many years ago. And since that time, there are plenty of examples of people who have done just that and gone beyond. And the one little caveat that I want to say about that is that it's not for everybody. It's a full-time job tending your fans.
Yeah.
Or at least a part-time job. And not everybody is suited for it. And there's many creators who don't want to spend time fondling their fans. They want to just paint or draw or whatever it is. And they're happy to kind of give some of their money to someone else to deal with it. So so that is something to be aware of. Yes, you can make a living with 1,000 true fans, but it takes, it's at least a half-time job. And not everybody really wants to do it or is suited to do it. But it is an option that was never there before. So
I love that. And Kevin Kelly, thank you so much. We're going to start wrapping up. I'm just wanted to say, this is a true fan moment for me. And I hope a lot of people that are listening can go to your website, can go to your, resources, and, you can start cultivating that community. Where would you send people to find you, and what are your upcoming new projects that you would like to tell people about?
People can find me at kk.org. I'm Kevin 2 Kelly on all the social media, Kevin the number 2 Kelly. And I just completed a book called Vanishing Asia, which was kickstarted very successfully, but it is available on Amazon. There's a shipping problem of global consequences where those books aren't available in the US yet, but when they are, you'll be able to order it on Amazon, called Vanishing Asia. Just check it there. So thank you. I really enjoyed being here. Wish you the best, and live long and prosper.